Hello, brothers and sisters. The title of the message today is Being Led by the Hand of the Lord. Number 3, the house where the magnolia flowers in full bloom. Subtitle number 2, meeting family members during the weekend. Since I came to Daegu in 1975, I always went to Jecheon City to meet my family members. I worked in Daegu from Monday afternoon to Saturday morning, and I started from Dongdaegu train station at 6 p.m. Changed the train in Yeongcheon to Central Route train and arrived at Jecheon train station at 1:20 a.m. I spent Sunday with my son Hwapyeong and came down to Daegu on Monday at noon. I can say either way, I was living at my wife's maiden home, or I was supporting my father-in-law and mother-in-law. And Young Kim gave a house to us about half price. Mother-in-law paid 200,000 won, we paid 640,000 won. The rest of the money out of 1.14 million. 1.14 million won, I paid 640,000 won, and my wife paid 500,000 won. During those days, I could not try to figure out anything. I was not so much interested in home problems. Suppose I was worried about my home problems and children problems when Reverend Jun Gong Kim, the director of Campus Crusade, told me to go down to Daegu. I could have not answered yes, sir, right away. My mother was an old grandma, and my children absolutely needed parents. Eunhae was four years old. The Hwapyeong was 3 years old, and Jinshil was not born yet. Eunhae was born when I was working at Yeongcheon Church. Hwapyeong was born when I left Yeongcheon Church and living in Yeonhee-dong. And Jinshil was born when we were living in Jecheon City. When my wife was working at ladies' dressmakers, she would take Eunhae with her, and Hwapyeong was staying at home. My niece Kyung-suk took care of household chores and took care of Hwapyeong. Kyung-suk had to take care of 9 family members and workers' lunch at the dressmakers, so her workload was too much for her. And moreover, she had to take care of Hwapyeong. Kyung-suk was busy, and Hwapyeong was lonely. Eunhae's character was so mild. Grandma loved her so much. But Hwapyeong was a boy. He needed mother, but he had to stay at home. He cried a lot always. As he was separated from mom, grandma took care of him. Kyung-suk was so busy with household chores, she couldn't play with Hwapyeong, but when she brings lunch for the workers in dressmakers, she accompanied Hwapyeong with her. My wife had a heartache whenever she had to go to work, leaving her son at home. How troublesome it was when she left the young son behind. In Grandma's heart, she was holding her only grandson in her heart, but as she became so old and her back is bent, she could not do anything. She felt so painful. She had no other way. Grandpa from mother's side was just reading books all day. When I came up to Jecheon, I wanted to spend a whole day with my son. When I could do just for one day, I had to unwind all the entangled emotion of my son. After I spent a whole day with my son, his thirst toward love is filled up again, and he could feel stability. One day in Jecheon was so important for me. I wanted to do everything that I could do. I took the night train. I needed to take a rest, but my son gets up early. I spent a whole day with him. I forgot the fatigue. I made up my mind I want to love him with a quality love, which I could not fill up in quantity. The referring to love, I think quality is more important than quantity. I poured my love to him with all my heart. And when I left, I could not leave him crying so hard and getting hold of my leg. I knew it's so hard to leave home secretly. Kyung-suk took his hand and said, "Let's go to Mom's store." My son wanted to see his mom. And that moment, I took a taxi and went to Checheon train station, hurriedly back to Daegu. I came down to Daegu thinking about my son in the train, who is seeking for his father. But when I arrived in Daegu, I forgot about my son. And in Daegu, I had to work hard, which I received order from the headquarters. When my son thought about his father, but his father left Checheon already. I still remember those days, and my son and my heart really hurts. If something happens to him, I always relate to those days, and I regret. In such an important days for him, he did not have the garden of love. He just played along, always. Sometimes he went to his mother's store, but there was no one who would take care of him. As I look back and try to arrange things, I did not think about anything. I cannot definitely say whether I intentionally did not think or I couldn't think. I don't know exactly. I just accepted whatever the reality may be. I accepted it. I didn't try to fix it or change it. When I was in Daegu, I didn't think about Checheon home. And when I was in Checheon home, I didn't think about Daegu. When I took the train, I just thought about where can I get a seat. And the moment I got a seat, I had to fall asleep right away. Taking night train of Chungang Line was so hard. I took a train at 6 p.m. in Daegu. At 7, I got in Yeongcheon Station, waited for the train which left Busan going to Cheongnyangni. When I was waiting, I had to have dinner, and the train was full of ladies who were going to Guinsa Temple. At first, I had to stand, but I spread a newspaper and sat down any place. Later, I got a very excellent idea. Fishermen carry a folding chair, and I was able to sit there. It was much better, but between 10 to 2 a.m., it's time that make me so tired. It was not so comfortable. I spent that kind of life for 2 years in Campus Crusade and 1 more year after I got out of Campus Crusade, total for 3 years. I got married in 1972 January and got Eunhae on the Christmas Eve 1971. We left the Yeongcheon Church 20th July 1972. Moved to Yeonhee-dong, and my wife took my daughter Eunhae and went down to Chungju. October that year, I finished step training in Campus Crusade. I was assigned to Chungju branch. After I finished the Explo 74 in August 1974, the autumn that year, my wife moved to Checheon. We lived together for 3 years. I was staying at a boarding house in Chungju, and I was transferred to Daegu, and we were laid off in 1977 February. And Daegu Church was started in April 1977. I was 34 years old, and my wife was 27 years old when we got married. I was 40 years old, and my wife was 33 years old. We passed through typhoon, gale, and Daegu Church was started. My wife had to live in Checheon, and when she became 35 years old, she came down to Daegu. After marriage, we could live at the same house for 3 years, And 4 years we met only during the weekend. My wife had to take care of her own parents, mother-in-law, 3 children, by objectified viewpoints or by subjectified viewpoints. She was carrying the burden many times heavier than her own body. She had to make money for 8 members of her family and also had to pay for the house. She could not walk straight. She seemed to be walking, dragging her own legs. The burden for my wife seemed to be too heavy, but she never complained to me. She set me free to follow Lord's order, wherever that may be, or whatever that may be. I could obey. I did not need to discuss with anybody. Suppose I met my wife who is paying too much attention to personal or worldly life. When Reverend Jung Gong Kim ordered to me go down to Daegu, they couldn't say yes right away. If not, I could have answered, yes, sir, but I have to discuss with my family members. I could have not become brave servant of the Lord. I could have become pitiful servant. Well, I cannot argue with my family members. Always, I cannot obey complaining of my family on my back. Even though I may be a single-minded person toward the Lord, suppose I met a wrong spouse, how could I walk this path in peace? The Lord made me an inevitable person, and the Lord let me walk the inevitable path that let me meet the appropriate spouse, as my wife was also an inevitable woman. Lord, let me meet inevitable husband. My wife followed me without any complaining, even though she had so many problems. She knew the reality of her maiden home very well, and she could not tell everything to me who's living without looking at the worldly environment. She could not talk to me a long storytelling, all the worldly issues. Before marriage, my father-in-law was against our marriage, and it was quite natural. As parents, who will allow their precious daughter to suffer hardship after marriage? Subtitle number 3, the house where the magnolia was in full bloom. At first, we bought one sewing technician from Chechen. We did not have any problem in managing dressmakers in Daegu, but she returned to Chechen again. She may be very lonely in Daegu. Next, Brother Kap Soo Che, the younger brother of Brother Young Soo Che, helped my wife in operating sewing machine, but suddenly he did not come to work. My wife had to work with a sewing machine also. Her backache came back again, so she couldn't work anymore. It was a small store in the village, but she made money to support my family. But she suddenly could not work. It was a difficult problem again, so we closed up the store. There was a nearby house, and it was comparatively cheap. We had 1.5 million won from the rent. We accumulated some money. We paid 3 million won and bought that house. I vividly remember there was a magnolia tree that was in full bloom. Our dressmaker's name happened to be the Magnolia also. It was the first house that we bought, the normal individual house. When I was little, until I became 6 years old, we moved 12 times. We always lived in the attached room at the thatched roof house in the countryside. We moved to a house where there was a store. There was just one room. It was facing the street. There was just a window without window pane, just a piece of paper. When I was little, I did not know anything, but as I reached to my puberty age, I felt so sorry because I did not have my own room, but I had no choice. The room was just 4 square meters. There were 4 members who were living together, along with my sister. My sister got married when I was 7 years old. 3 people were living in that house. When Korea was liberated from Japanese colonial rule, 2 nephews who used to live in Japan came back to Korea and stayed at my room. After Korean War, one of my nephews among a distant relative lived together for a short time. My father passed away when I was 20 years old. My sister's husband died, brought 3 daughters, and lived together. After my sister died, 3 nephews, myself and my mom, lived together in that room. Jesus said that the Son of Man had no place where he could lay his head down. And I did not have my own room of my own. It was the same until I left Noah Island at the age of 27. When I was attending theological college, I was staying at the dormitory. When I was assigned to Youngchun Church, I was staying at pastor's quarter. I got married and my wife and I were living there together. It was built with a soil brick, and it was just a temporary building. There were just thin window pane. The walls between 2 rooms were just made with a paper, like Japanese-style house. Kitchen and the entrance of the house were the same. It was pastor's quarter, but it was just a temporary sleeping place, that's all. Female evangelist, her son and brother were living in one room, and my mom and me were living next room. Even the quiet, the breathing could be heard. But as I got married, that female evangelist left. We could live at a separate house for the first time. After we left Youngchun Church, deacons gathered some money, and it was 100,000 won. We rented a room and tiny kitchen, and we lived there for several months. We moved down to Chungju with 100,000 won that we got from the rent room, and 180,000 won my mother-in-law lent us. With that money, we rented an old house. That old house had 1 kitchen, and it had a garden and vegetable field. We lived there for 1 year. Then we moved to Jecheon. My family lived together with my mother-in-law and father-in-law, and I was staying at my boarding house in Chungju. Thank you. Hallelujah. Thank you again. Thank you.